This little film was made by the BBC in the late 1980s using home movie footage shot in Ballycastle. About 80% of the film was taken by my father, Charlie McBride, in the 1950s and 1960s when our family spent every summer in Ballycastle. Lit by love and sunshine is the line from an old Irish ballad, The Owl Lammas Fair, and refers to the town of Ballycastle. The film has its own commentary, and I will only interject occasionally to point out a member of the family.
Ballycastle, County Antrim. For many, it's the Owl Lammas Fair or a day trip during the summer. But for those of us who grew up here during the 50s and 60s, it was a very special place all the year round. We even knew it at the time. We really had two little towns to belong to, each with its own character. The market town and the seaside resort, joined together by a graceful tree-lined avenue open to the hills at one side. The sun didn't shine every day, but it appeared often enough to keep us happy. Part of Unionist Ulster and part of Nationalist Ireland, Ballycastle never fully gave its allegiance to either. Perhaps it was the influence of the Scottish Highlands and Islands which filled our horizons. The writ of Stormont never entirely ran here, while Dublin was further away than Edinburgh. When winter storms from the Atlantic Ocean swept across the bay, cutting off the harbour to all shipping, the flimsy power lines came down and blizzards blocked the roads. We got out the candles, the paraffin and the tilly lamps and functioned perfectly well as an almost self-contained community. We took pride in our fine schools, which unfortunately were to educate so many of us for export. We were taught our local history, even if it wasn't on the curriculum. We heard about times of glory and of shame, of Donaghini Castle on the cliff top, its name perhaps indicating the original site of the Lammas Fair, of the bloody massacre in 1565 on the slopes of Knocklade, when Shane O'Neill, with the connivance of Queen Elizabeth, attempted to drive the MacDonalds back to Scotland, and of the destruction of Bunnamargy Friary by the same MacDonalds almost 20 years later when they tried to eject the occupying English troops. We knew the stories of Julia McQuillan, the Black Nun of Bunnamargy. On dark winter's nights, our bicycles sped past to the sound of plain chant as the wind blew through the telephone wires. We were proud to know also the secrets of our town's golden age. From 1736, Colonel Hugh Boyd, whose father had been the local rector, transformed the tiny village around the castle, sited near to the present town church, and the nearby even smaller fishing hamlet of Margytown into one of the largest industrial complexes in Ireland, based on the extensive coal seams nearby. He diverted two rivers to allow construction of a fine enclosed harbour on the site of the tennis courts, capable of holding up to 40 ships, with an extended quay alongside for loading and unloading. An outer harbour provided a safe approach and anchorage, and the narrow channel between the basins was crossed by a lifting bridge. A wooden wagonway used in the harbour construction was probably the earliest railway in Ireland. It was later extended to the colliery using a bridge over the Margy River. His enterprises included a salt works at the Pans Rocks, coal mines, a brewery, ironworks, soap works, bleach works, tannery, weaving sheds, several water mills, an inn, and a huge conical kiln on Glass Island for the manufacture of crown glass and bottles. So much trade was done in the port that a customs house was opened. Hugh Boyd, who built his manor house on the quayside in the midst of his enterprises, had an interest in architecture and may have designed his own church, Holy Trinity on the Diamond. sadly for Ballycastle, he died in 1765. Without his drive and control, most of the industries soon failed. The ships departed and the harbour silted up. Some prosperity returned in the next century, with the town becoming a market and trading centre for the surrounding area. Completion of the coast road helped to bring tourists to the new hotels. Quarrying and export of iron ore and stone continued, with several substantial piers being constructed around the coast. Ballycastle limestone had a high reputation as a building material and was used in the facades of Mussenden Temple, Downhill Castle, and many other fine buildings. Coal mining continued, but as the best seams became exhausted, the coal got a bad reputation for slate content. Many of the mines were very wet, requiring expensive pumping, and there was always a danger to miners of roof collapse. By 1950, 6 mines were left, the last closing in 1964. Over a period, the ships which once exported coal from Ballycastle began to import it, sometimes along the coast from the bigger harbours at Portrush and Coleraine. These ships were unloaded at a new pier onto motor lorries belonging to Nichols Coal and Timber Yard. This was also served by a private track off the narrow gauge railway line from Ballymoney, which had opened in 1880. The siding from the coal yard to the station was so steep that 2 winchmen were needed to raise and lower the trucks. The railway formed the principal link with the outside world for many years and helped to bring in tourists. But the fact that the track had been laid to a different gauge than the main lines meant that it was not possible to run through excursion trains from Belfast, so the large crowds went to Portrush instead. The sturdy little tank engines coped well with the steep gradients on the line, and the carriages, which had centre corridors, framed pictures and deep padded seats, were the most luxurious on any Irish narrow gauge railway. The last trains ran on this line in July 1950, and for 4 years afterwards it became our adventure playground. We didn't damage anything because we hoped that somebody would make it all work again. But it wasn't to be. One day a lot of men came down from the city and cut up our railway. They told us that the rails were going to India. That didn't make us feel any better. But we were young and lived in the present,
That's Hugo,
so
my
we
brother.
found somewhere else to play. For our parents, the winter months before the visitors arrived weren't all relaxation. On calm days, some fishing was possible, and much-needed provisions could be sent to the pier to be picked up by the Rathlin Islanders, who had often undergone long periods of isolation. Work also continued on the farms. The people of the town were given a taste of this in the horse ploughing competition held each February in the fields close by. We didn't always understand what we were looking at, but we loved the big, powerful horses, always so beautifully groomed. We occasionally had uninvited visitors, cast-ups from the winter storms. Social activities in the winter centred round the churches, but in addition to parochial activities, many other events were open to all. In the Key Road Hall, Frank McCollum's Fiddler's Nights were not to be missed, nor were the whist drives, plays, and even opera. Dances were held here and in the Orange Hall. Among many events, the McAllister Hall hosted Macbeth and Hamlet from a new McMaster's touring company. Television reception was poor, so the cinema did good business, with the best seats at 1 and 9p. The energetic among us played hockey or hurling on wind-swept pitches high above the town. For others, it was more important to keep warm. There wasn't much traffic on the roads, so as the days warmed up in the spring, whole families went for long
My grandfather
Sunday
was
walks.
some of the members of the family.
We really knew that the season had arrived when the circus came to town.
These shots of the circus were all filmed by my father as part of a longer film lasting about an hour, in which the circus people cooperated with him, and
there was glamour
they
and
came out
excitement on the screen at the pictures, and
did their turns
Shakespeare
for
and
them.
Mozart were all right, but this was the real thing.
It's my brother and sister. When Fawcett Circus was here in Sligo, I invited old Mr. Fawcett up to view my father's film, and it was one of the nicest things I ever did in my life, because he was so thrilled with it all. This is about 40 years after it was taken, 50 years after it was taken. He knew everybody in it, and who their children were, where they were now. One of the funny things you'll see in a moment, people queuing up, and he turns to his son and says, "Look at the queues."
We couldn't wait for the 4 o'clock matinee. We organised our own processions too, as when musicians Geordie Mackay and Adam Sloan led Father Park, who was being transferred to Larne after 13 years in Ballycastle, through the streets of the town. The children of the parish gave him a grand send-off. On another occasion, the threatened closure of Dalriada Hospital, which had served the community so well for many years, united the medical staff and townspeople in protest. Although the battle was won, the campaign was lost, as when it was eventually rebuilt, full general hospital facilities were no longer provided. We warmly welcomed home distinguished Ballycastle people who'd found success in the world, such as Donal Lamont, here being greeted by Sister Marie and Canon McKinley. Dr. Lamont had been
That's me in
appointed
the yellow
Bishop of
jumper at the
Umtali,
back.
southern Rhodesia. The hardier visitors came early, some to the Holiday Fellowship Hostel at Coromila, which was later greatly expanded by voluntary effort to become a centre for Christian reconciliation under the Reverend Ray Davies' inspired leadership. In Hugh Boyd's old manor house, which had become a Dr. Bernardo's home, many children, some from a background of family tragedy, grew up happily by the seaside. Others had a more temporary stay as the caravans began to arrive. Visitors were always welcome, but some brought all their food with them and didn't go out much. There seemed to us to be more style in the mass invasion by the Scottish visitors on Upton's and Fawcett's coach tours. It lifted our spirits to see them arrive.
Here comes summer, school is out, oh happy day. Here comes summer, I'm gonna grab my girl and run away. Here comes summer, oh we'll go swimming every day.